Logical positivism has bring about the ideology that caused changes in the proposition of modern science around 20 centuries. It deals only with the phenomena that directly observable. However, the attempt to uphold the virtue of empirical truth through science was short-lived and subverted when the theory itself went into inconsistency and self-contradictory. Hence, this video will look over logical positivist theory and the critic lambasted it after it was introduced.
I'm going to explain about the introduction part of our assignment. Okay, first of all, what is philosophy of science? Philosophy of science is a sub-branch of epistemology that deal with both scientific assumptions, foundation, consequences with the use and merit of the science. Also, it received a very hybrid response from the scientific community traditionally. And philosophical schools mainly concerned with the logical study of scientific knowledge, also known as logical empiricism or logical positivism. Basically, logical positivism opposed philosophical ideas of metaphysics and orthodox, since they are taking all those philosophical ideas as nonsensical. So in order to that, logical positivists have introduced several theories to support their argument, such as unity of science, induction theory, analytic and synthetic statement, principle of verification, and finally theory of confirmation. All those theories will be discussed in our assignment in the body part.
Today, I will be presenting about the unity of science. Okay, first and foremost, unity of science was adopted by a group of philosophers which were known as Vienna Circle. Vienna Circle was established around 1920s in Vienna. This group gathered diverse group of thinkers which consists of philosophers, mathematicians as well as thinkers under one roof. The main focuses of this group was to discuss the philosophy, to develop analytic philosophy, as well as actively advertise new philosophical ideas of logical positivism. The views made by the members of this circle later became known as the logical empiricism, logical positivism, as well as neo-positivism. And later, their philosophical views or ideas has dominated the philosophical study of science. And then moving to the next part is explanation of the unity of science. Unity of science is a movement by the logical positivists that manifests all fields of sciences share the same languages, laws, and methods. The meaning of all sciences share the common or share the same portrayed and defined as, which is first, unity of language mean the reduction of all scientific terms to physics terms. Second, unity of law, which means the law from many fields of sciences deduced from set of fundamental laws that often regarded as physics. And third, the unity of method, which means the procedures for testing and supporting statements from various sciences. Unity of science also notions that propositions in science must display the events or affairs existed objectively, can be seen directly, and should have unitary set of physical premises where regularities reality could be derived. One of the thinkers that famously associated with the unity of science, namely as Otto Neurath, held that linguistics is crucial to him. For him, when the use of everyday languages in discussion, understand the context of discussion is a major element of unity. Neurath also advocates the use of universal jargon or universal slang. For him, languages must be used logically for it to be understandable and to prevent ambiguity. The languages will not restrict vocabulary of physics. And last but not least, according to Neurath, languages should avoid metaphysical terms and enrich technical terms.
Analytic and synthetic statement are two main types of sensible argument. It can be assessed feasible by empirical and logical verification. The meaningful statement can be confirmed in logical positivism. Analytic and synthetic statements have been used. It was because, according to them, only constructive statements can be regarded as confirmation. They, while further, oppose metaphysics since metaphysics is fallacious argument according to logical positivism. Analytical statement is feasible and self-explainable. The predicate should not have any innate value or understanding that is not presented in the subject. Sentences from analytical tell us about reasoning and use of words. They don't really have meaningful information from outside world. Synthetic statement applies to something rely on our sensory evidence and testimony where we require to examine. The true value of synthetic argument is not necessary to work out based on solely logic. An example of synthetic experience is the sun rise from the north.
For the last part, I would like to explain principle of verification under logical positivist principle. We know that logical positivists reject metaphysical explanation as it considered as meaningless and not empirically verifiable. Logical positivist has outlined two methods of verification, which is strong verification, which is the statement that has already fully conclusive and not possible of any empirical proposition such as mathematical problem solving, and weak verification, which is a theory can only verifiable through the empirical proposition by the virtue of science such as experiment. So by having these two aspects of verification, we can avoid the fact of science to fall under metaphysical speculation, because science are already distinguished into empirical proposition and theoretical proposition, we call as logical reasoning.
There are many criticisms exist against logical positivism. One of the criticism is from Karl Popper, focused on the theory of falsification. Karl Popper is a major social and political intellectual and a self-professed critical rationalist. The classic observationalist inductive version of the scientific mechanism was substituted by the falsification by Popper as the framework for distinguishing scientific theory from non-science. Popper claimed that scientific theory should make assumptions that can be checked, and the theory can be get rid of these predictions are found not to be accurate to proposed critical rationalism, which are using deductive logic as the main focus. Popper said no matter how many observations are made in order to support the hypothesis, there is always the risk that a potential observation could contradict it, so that induction is insufficient to generate certainty. Secondly, Karl Popper also criticized the naive scientific belief that universe is scientifically observed by all of us. Popper argued that all observations comes from a point of view, and therefore that our interpretations colors all observations. So that in the criticism of Popper, he claimed instead of attempting to prove it continuously, the scientists should attempt to counter their own hypothesis.
I'm doing the criticism towards logical positivist by Thomas Kuhn from his book The Structure of Scientific Revolution. Basically, the book is written in 1692. It's basically a radical attack or the radical criticize towards logical positivists in terms of philosophy of science, especially in terms of how we should understand the development and the growth of science. So Thomas Kuhn criticized logical positivists because he believed that the changes in scientific theory is not simplistic approach as what we can see from the theories introduced by logical positivists, but it was consists of progressive development, and it consists of a scientific revolution, or what Kuhn called as a paradigm shift. So according to Thomas, if we want to understand the growth or the development of science, we must to discuss it, or we must to explain it by a psychological approach, and we must to consider the historical consideration or historical factor, because the psychological consideration is actually show us that the changes in science is actually involve the change of perspective. And then historical consideration also a vital part, because if we want to know the example of the present science, we must to look back to the history of the theory. So Thomas Kuhn came out with the model of the structured science revolution to explain how science should develop. So the stages involve some process, for example, pre-paradigm, normal, science and paradigm, anomalies and crisis, and last but not least, revolution that lead to the new normal of science. So Thomas Kuhn want to emphasize that science is not simplistic approach as what shown by logical positivists, but it was a progressive, dynamic, and we must to understand science by looking at its development.
For the last part of criticism towards logical positivists, I would like to explain Quinn two dogma of empiricism. Quinn has defined the analyticality of things having a relation with metaphysical and philosophical explanation, which is governed to contradict to what logical positivists believe. And the criticism actually explained that this theory will lead to its self-contradiction when the theory or the fact of science is contested or being revised. So I would like to explain the first dogma, which is the analytical and synthetic distinction. The analytical belief should be free from testing, but we cannot avoid that. As the science are developing, we always revise the science. So once it's tested, the fact might sometimes be contaminated and the theory can be falsified. The hypothesis might change. And sometimes it led to the synthetic truth, which is the fact that might sometimes contradict to itself. And next is reductionism, which is the idea of science can be understandable by taking them apart into smaller things. Reductionism might cause the fact to be changed, and it is not always perfect and can be contested.
In conclusion, our group assignment already discussed about what is logical positivism and some of their main ideas. We can conclude that logical positivism is eliminating all elements of metaphysics in all areas of knowledge. This is because, according to them, if we want to discover the true knowledge, we must to discover it solely based on our logical mind and empiricalism method. And this assignment also discussed the three main figures that criticize logical positivists, such as Thomas Kuhn, Quinn, and Karl Popper. So that's all. Assalamualaikum and thank you so much.